Hi everyone. So I found myself a bit of extra time tonight, so I thought I'd give some of my thoughts in regards to a question which is commonly discussed by people online. There are different points of view on this topic. It's quite a contentious one, and that's basically about the relationship between socionics and the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And by relationship, I don't mean the official history. I mean in terms of how are they meant to be treated next to one another. So you find there are two broad camps, two main positions you could say. There's the first one, which is the one which basically says, oh, they're actually the same theory. They are the same thing. In fact, everyone who is an INTP must be a LII. Um, there are variants of this who actually say no. Actually, everyone who is an INTP must be an ILI, and they do it via dichotomies. Others do it via cognitive functions. They assume there's a direct one-to-one conversion, and the only disagreement between them is whether there's a JP switch or not. Now, that particular view, I think, is blatantly absurd. There is um, an interesting table actually put together by Dmitry Leitov. He basically collected different sociologists together several years ago and presented them with the different type profiles written by David Kiersey, who's, although not strictly speaking, not Myers-Briggs. It's basically treated as being Myers-Briggs. It's treated as basically canon. His ideas are essential to things like NTs and NFs, SJs, SPs. So it's treated as part of the Myers-Briggs canon, even though it isn't really technically speaking. But looking at his profiles, they were then asked, these sociologists, what socionics type does each Kiersey type profile sound like? And what was found is that other than three types, the type dichotomy one-to-one conversion did not work. It only worked for ENTP because ENTP is well known for being pretty much the only type that actually does have a reliable one-to-one correlation. But also, they suggested that ISTPs, that profile does sound like an SLI, and ISFP does sound like a SEI, which, although that works, that also contradicts the sort of one-to-one JP switch idea. So another three was sort of like a very mild correlation. Like, yeah, more people voted for that type being matching than didn't. Um, than any other. They had a plurality of votes, you could say, but still, it wasn't actually even particularly strong leaning. Then the remaining 10 out of 16, no, often either they couldn't agree on the type that from socionics that really matched that Kiersey type profile, or they actually settled around a different type completely. A very interesting example was looking at Kiersey's type profile for INTJ, where the sociologists thought that SLE actually sounded the most like the INTJ, which is just ridiculous. But that shows really just how differently the Myers-Briggs types and well, these Kiersey types, I should say, and socionics types are understood. They are understood completely differently in some cases. And I think the further away you get from ENTP, I think the more apparent that becomes. So that's one thing. I would add to that if you look at, say, cognitive functions versus information metabolism elements, there are slight differences in some of the definitions. Extroverted sensation being defined differently, extroverted thinking as well, that has a more of a bossy characteristic played up in stereotypes of ENTJs and ESTJs that isn't in existence in socionics, and that's given more to extroverted sensation. And introverted sensation is defined very differently between the two. We could go into a very long video talking about the differences and similarities between each cognitive function, each information metabolism element is meant to be paired with. But yeah, it doesn't work, this idea that they're the same. The second view is that they are, it's not that they're the same, they're totally different. They are completely independent systems, and you could be, I don't know, an ENTP in one and an ESI in the other, or something like that. I would say this is a particularly common but also kind of lazy view. It's the sort of view someone takes when they basically don't want to have an argument. They're fed up of people saying it's the same and trying to tell people, well, you are an ISFJ, therefore you cannot be a IEI and socials and that sort of thing, which goes on a lot of online community posts. And they said, no, they're just totally different systems. That's also, it's not true. They're not totally independent systems. That's disregarding the whole history of how they evolved. They're clearly meant to be doing. They're clearly meant to be Jungian typologies. They're clearly trying to look at the same underlying thing. There is clear overlap, even though there's not a perfect one-to-one correlation. That is clearly meant to be the case for that saying. They're both coming from Jung's works. They're both trying to do a similar sort of thing with cognitive functions, information elements existing as some sort of stack, which leads to some descriptions of either behaviors or cognitive processes, depending on which side of the internal incoherence of Myers-Briggs you want to get on. But yeah, trying to do the same thing really. So no, I can't say they're totally different. They're not totally independent from each other. The reason it might be useful to think that way is if you're first learning about socionics, and this is kind of is the proof of it, that the reason you are told to almost, it's basically an imagination game. You're told to assume they're entirely different. The only reason being that if you carry assumptions from MBTI into learning socionics, that can make the process more difficult. It can impede your transition to socionics. So an advice I myself have even given is treat them like they're entirely different, so that you don't have these pre-existing assumptions. You get rid of your bad habits before you go into socionics. But that's not to mean it's true. It's just useful a way of framing it so that can aid you in your learning rather than impede you in your learning. In reality, no, they're trying to do the same thing. They are originating from the same source. So no, it's not that they're totally different, totally independent, and there are legitimately some type combinations which don't make any sense. And the only reason which one would say, okay, fine, you can be whatever, is simply because the reasons for being any particular type in the Myers-Briggs community can vary so widely, that there's really no point at some point in actually trying to say there's a clear rule which makes you one type or another in Myers-Briggs, except just what you happen to get on that test that particular day. Yeah, people come up with all sorts of personal rationales for why there is something which don't make any sense. But yeah, that's more of a problem with Myers-Briggs than it is something which reflects on the two theories actually being independent, because they're not. Now, those are the two main views, and you can tell from what I've just said that I think they're both wrong. So you might be interested to know what my view is. So I've given this some thought, and I think it's kind of a mix of the two. I do believe that there is that there is one Jungian typology. So that's where I agree with Camp 1. There is one Jungian typology, that is the correct one. But I also agree with number 2 that you can't do these one-to-one correlations. It's not that simple. Doing that is basically pretending that the Myers-Briggs is like socionics when it's not in some of its assumptions and how it defines things. So instead, my view is this: there is one Jungian typology, and there are different theories for trying to articulate what that Jungian typology is. Different theories with different levels of success. So there's one Jungian typology, that is the phenomenon, the thing we're trying to describe, these 16 types. What are they? What do the types actually look like? And we're trying to form an understanding of what these types truly are. And Myers-Briggs had an attempt. You could say Jungian cognitive functions being perhaps slightly different from Myers-Briggs, although it's treated as the same, is another attempt. And it's sort of lumped in as the same without people realizing they're different. Keirsey is another attempt. And then multiple other attempts. There's, I wouldn't call I wouldn't call objective personality really a Jungian attempt. It looks like it is, it isn't. That is totally different. Um, Whereas, I don't know, something like voltology, cognitive personality, all these other different theories, again, other attempts. Podler, another attempt, I think. So, yeah, and I think out of these different attempts to describe true Jungian type, I think socionics is the best one. So what does that mean? Some are better, some are worse. Well, first of all, say why I think socionics is the best one. I could probably do another whole video on it, but I think it has the most articulate way of putting together what all the different parts making it up are. So information metabolism elements. Typically we talk about 5 information dichotomies defining what those are. There are actually 7. Recently thinking about what these extra 2 are. And same thing with the functions. There are these 8 function slots different to the information metabolism elements. Cognitive functions sort of just confuse that, but it's kept separate. It's clear, it's distinct, everything is in socionics. And again, another 7 dichotomies telling you what a function is. So very clear, really drills down, and it then puts together something which is internally coherent and has a far greater explanatory power than the Myers-Briggs types. So I think it's the best. I think it's hands down the best. I have not yet encountered anyone who is intelligent enough to realize that a debate carries some risk, who is also an expert in Myers-Briggs, who's actually willing to debate me. Not a single one stepped forward. There's only been one person who has debated me, and they're kind of, well, the exception that proves the rule. There is no easy. It's an immediately lost debate. It becomes patently clear as soon as you compare the two that socionics is a lot better than Myers-Briggs, and I'm happy for anyone who is incensed by that to come out and debate me on it. It's very clear. So yeah, socionics is the best one. Now there's different Jungian typologies, different approaches to understanding Jungian typology, I should say. So socionics is the best. What do? I'd say we treat socionics as our working theory for Jungian typology. Socionics is the latest patch in the operating model, you could say. Which means if someone says, "Oh, I'm an INTP in Myers-Briggs, and I'm a socionics version of an ENTP," I don't think that's right either. You can't. The idea of you being different types in 2 systems isn't really the approach that's right either. Instead, I'd say this: you thought you were an INTP back when you were looking at Myers-Briggs, but now that you know socionics, you can realize you are actually an ILE, and you can forget about your Myers-Briggs type because it's a lower resolution model for understanding the complexities of Jungian type. Now you know socionics, you don't need these other models. You don't need to look at it in that particular way. Sure, you can turn to non-Jungian models like Enneagram or some sort of, some people use Psyche Yoga, or I'm skeptical that that's really something that's separate. I think it overlaps too much. You could turn to the Big 5 as another lens or perspective for understanding personality, maybe. But in terms of Jungian typology, I think you should work with the one that is the best at the moment, and that is socionics. When something better than socionics comes along, then we'll go to that model and we'll have the highest resolution possible. So yeah, that's my thoughts about it really. Once you know your socionics type, the MBTI becomes null and void. It's not a question of you being 2 different types, no, or even the same type in both, no. There's just a socionics type now. Myers-Briggs is out of date, and the only reason why people don't realize that yet is ignorance. They don't know yet. They haven't been made aware of this. They haven't had enough time to delve into the theory to understand this, and we've got to be telling them. We've got to be making this clear. So yeah, that's my view. Thank you for listening in. All the best. Bye bye.